The Ukrainian southern counter-offensive is an ongoing military offensive launched on August 29 to expel Russian forces occupying the southern regions of Kherson and Mykolaiv oblasts. Originally, it was announced that the counterattack aimed to recover all Russian-occupied territory within the Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and Mykolaiv oblasts. Military analysts consider the counteroffensive to be the third strategic phase of the war in Ukraine along with the concurrent eastern counteroffensive, after the initial invasion and the Battle of Donbass. After many strikes against Russian military targets, Ukraine announced the start of a full-scale counteroffensive on August 29, 2022. As of October 17, 2022, Ukraine had liberated numerous small villages and over 1,170 square kilometers of occupied territory. Background: Russian offensive. During the 2022 southern Ukraine offensive, Russian troops invaded the Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and Mykolaiv oblasts. In the early days of the war, Russian troops captured several cities in southern Ukraine, including Melitopol and Kherson, pushing Ukrainian troops back to the city of Mykolaiv in an attempt to reach Odessa from the southeast, though Russian forces were later forced back following the Battle of Voznesensk, but continued to occupy small parts in western Mykolaiv Oblast, such as Snihurivka. In Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Russian troops pushed north, eventually defeating Ukrainian servicemen in the Battle of Enerodar, seizing the city in addition to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russian forces also pushed east, reaching the Donetsk/Zaporizhzhia administrative borders. Russian occupation. Ukrainian counterattacks. By March 11 the Russian offensive had stalled on numerous fronts within Mykolaiv Oblast, prompting gradual retreat by the end of the month. In April, Ukrainian authorities said they had pushed the enemy southwards to the border with Kherson Oblast. On April 18, Russian, DPR, and LPR forces launched the Battle of Donbass, requiring some of their forces to be transferred to the east. The Ukrainian military took advantage with attacks in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia oblasts, forcing Russian troops out or several fortified positions south of the Inhulets River. In late May, Ukraine launched minor attacks on the border between Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk oblasts. By June 1, the Institute for the Study of War had assessed that Ukrainian counterattacks in Kherson Oblast had successfully disrupted Russian ground lines of communication along the Inhulets River. Throughout June, small parts of northwestern Kherson and northern Zaporizhzhia oblasts were regained by Ukrainian forces, with fierce fighting around Davidov Brid. However, the main line of Russian defenses did not retreat as initially planned. Before July 9, Ukraine had conducted numerous small counterattacks on Russian forces, pushing them into defensive positions. By July 25, the region's military governor claimed that Ukraine had retaken 44 towns and villages or 15% of the region's territory. Partisan warfare. There were numerous reports of partisan warfare within the occupied territories. In the city of Melitopol, Ukrainian resistance leaders claimed to have killed 100 Russian soldiers by June 5. In Kherson, Ukrainian sources claimed that resistance fighters bombed a cafe frequented by Russian troops, killing Russian collaborators and destroying Russian military infrastructure. Assassination attempts and bombings have also been carried out on collaborators. On August 30, shootouts and explosions were recorded in the city, which Russian officials attributed to spies and saboteurs. Prelude. Ukrainian officials first hinted at a large-scale military offensive in mid to late June, saying that visible results should be expected from Ukrainian counteroffensives by August 2022. A Ukrainian general stated on June 15 that if Ukraine were supplied sufficient weapons, it would be able to mount a massive counteroffensive by the summer. On July 5, Ukraine launched a major bombing campaign against Russian outposts in Melitopol, reportedly killing 200 soldiers. On July 7, Ukraine retook Snake Island, affording Ukraine access to valuable sea channels and grain export lanes. Meanwhile, Russia tried to strengthen its hold on Kherson and Zaporizhzhia oblasts. Russia stated that babies born in Kherson Oblast would automatically receive Russian citizenship, implying that Kherson was a part of the Russian Federation. Speculation of counteroffensive. In the morning of July 9, Ukrainian government authorities began to urge residents of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia oblasts to evacuate from their homes due to an impending Ukrainian counteroffensive. Residents of occupied Kherson in particular were urged to create shelters to survive the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Irina Vereshchuk, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, warned of intense fighting and shelling in the upcoming days, claiming that the ZSU is coming. On July 9, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky ordered the Ukrainian military, including elements of Operational Command South, to retake occupied territory. On the same day, Ukrainian Minister of Defense Oleksiy Reznikov stated that Ukraine was amassing a million-strong fighting force for the offensive. Later, Reznikov said that there was a misunderstanding during his interview, and that 1 million is the total manpower of the Ukrainian security and defense sector. He also denied that there was a specific offensive operation. On July 24, Surai Klan, a Kherson region official, stated that the Kherson region will definitely be liberated by September, and all the occupiers' plans will fail. Writing a few months later in The Atlantic, military historian Phillips O'Brien remarked that it was unusual for a side to openly signal an intended offensive. He suggested that by encouraging the Russians to bring soldiers to the western side of the Dnieper and then attacking the bridges, it was creating a trap for them. Early engagements. In early July, the Ukrainian army engaged in minor skirmishes with Russian forces. On July 11, the Ukrainian army reported that it had recaptured the village of Ivanivka in Kherson Oblast. Ukrainian troops struck Nova Kakhovka, a Russian command post in Kherson city, with HIMARS missiles, and claimed it killed 12 officers and a Russian major general. By the afternoon, Ukrainian authorities claimed that Russian forces were transferring equipment to the left bank of the Dnieper, creating roadblocks within Kherson city in preparation for street battles. Ukrainian authorities urged civilians in Zaporizhzhia Oblast to evacuate, suggesting that a major counteroffensive was soon to come. On July 13, the head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration claimed that Ukraine launched counterattacks along the entire Mykolaiv-Kherson Zaporizhzhia front line. Ukrainian forces destroyed a Russian ammunition depot in Radensk southeast of Kherson city, and unspecified Russian positions in Nova Kakhovka. Ukraine continued to strike Russian targets and approached towards Kherson over the next week. Preparation phase and initial offensive announcements. According to a July 24 statement by Kherson region official Surai Klan, Ukrainian attacks damaging Antonivka Road Bridge and another key bridge, and attacks on Russian ammunition stores and command posts, were preparatory actions for the offensive. A day earlier, Klan stated that Ukrainian forces had retaken several villages in Kherson Oblast, but that the Ukrainian authorities requested civilians not to publish information on the progress of the campaign prior to official statements. On July 26, Antonivka Road Bridge was hit again by a Ukrainian HIMARS missile strike. The bridge remained structurally intact while the bridge's roadway surface was damaged. On July 27, 2022, Ukrainian forces stated that they had retaken control of the villages of Lazov and Andriivka, both on the eastern side of the Inhulets River, in Berislav Rayon in Kherson Oblast. In the next months, Ukrainian forces launched a series of limited ground attacks as well as several air and rocket attacks on Russian targets in southern Ukraine. On August 9, explosions heavily damaged the Russian airbase at Novofdorivka, Crimea. An anonymous Western official stated that the explosions, possibly caused by a Ukrainian attack, had put more than half of Black Sea Fleet's naval aviation combat jets out of use. Though these Ukrainian attacks were met with some success, they did not cripple Russian defenses in the south or achieve a breakthrough. On August 10, an unnamed Ukrainian military official told Politico that the counteroffensive had begun in earnest on August 9. However, Al Jazeera argued that both sides had seemingly fought each other to a standstill, with the major Ukrainian offensive not materializing. Preceding Russian offensive in the south. On August 20, Russian forces launched a minor offensive in southern Ukraine, with Ukrainian sources admitting that Russian forces had advanced and made gains in the towns of Blaoditny and Vasilki in Mykolaiv Oblast. On August 22, Russian forces achieved some success east of the city of Mykolaiv and in northwestern Kherson Oblast, driving Ukrainian forces 36 kilometers from the front line to the north and 28 kilometers deep into the territory of Mykolaiv Oblast with two objectives: to force a westward direction towards the city Mykolaiv or in a northerly direction towards the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast with the intention of capturing the city of Kryvyi Rih, which hosts a strong Ukrainian troop concentration, and from where a counteroffensive on Kherson, Melitopol, Enerodar, Berdyansk, and Crimea is planned. On the same day, Russian forces took control of Blaoditny about 45 kilometers east of the town of Mykolaiv in a 12 square kilometer zone of control. On August 23, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that Russian forces had advanced northwest of Alexandrovka, approximately 38 kilometers west of the city of Kherson, and had reached the administrative border of Kherson-Mykolaiv Oblast. Ukrainian troops retaliated with artillery strikes on the site of the Russian 247th Airborne Regiment of the 7th Guards Air Assault Division and the ammunition depot in Kernobevka. The same day, Russian forces continued air and artillery strikes on Dnipropetrovsk, Kryvyi Rih, and Mykolaiv with Uragan rockets. From 24 to August 25, the Russian forces continued their attacks but made no further progress. On August 27, Russian and Ukrainian forces clashed at Potomkine in northwestern Kherson Oblast. Both sides claimed that they had repelled an attack. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine continued to conduct airstrikes in the area, with Ukraine's Southern Operational Command claiming successful hits on 3 river crossings and 2 Russian battalion tactical groups. The Institute for the Study of War has credited the Ukrainian Southern Offensive with allowing the Kharkiv offensive to be so successful. Writing, Kyiv's long discussion and then an announcement of a counter-offensive operation aimed at Kherson Oblast drew substantial Russian troops away from the sectors on which Ukrainian forces have conducted decisive attacks in the past several days. Counter-offensive. August. On August 29, Zelensky announced the start of a full-scale counter-offensive to retake Russian-occupied territory in the south, a claim that was corroborated by the Ukrainian parliament as well as Operational Command South. At the start of the operation, the Ukrainian operational group Kakhovka and some Ukrainian officials claimed that their forces had broken through defensive lines manned by the 109th DPR Regiment and Russian paratroopers. The 109th DPR Regiment was a conscript unit which was known to serve on garrison duty in the Kherson area. Ukrainian officials also claimed that they had hit and destroyed a large Russian base in the area amid a general increase of Ukrainian air and artillery bombardments of Russian positions. The authorities in occupied Kherson called these claims fake and an illusion, but also announced a workplace evacuation from Nova Kakhovka following Ukrainian missile strikes. Locals reported heavy fighting across the Kherson front line, while electrical networks temporarily failed and evacuations of civilians took place. An NPR journalist in the area confirmed the increased intensity of combat and that more Ukrainian forces were moving to the front line. The Ukrainian government and military largely refused to talk about territorial changes on the offensive's first day, though anonymous Ukrainian officials, Western journalists, and a number of Russian mill bloggers reported that Ukrainian troops had captured several settlements north and northwest of Kherson, at a bridgehead across the Inhulets River, as well as south of the Kherson-Dnipropetrovsk Oblast border. Among these were the villages of Suky I Stavok, Novodmitrovka, Arkhangelsk, Tumyna Baka, and Pravdine. The Ukrainians also attacked Russian pontoon ferries on the Dnipro River. By August 30, Russia was beginning to direct large numbers of troops and equipment to the Kherson front line to counter the Ukrainian offensive. Meanwhile, Ukraine intensified its attacks on Russian concentration points, ammunition depots, bridges, and other targets. In Kherson city, there were reports of fighting between Ukrainian partisans and pro-Russian security forces. Russian mill bloggers claimed that battles were ongoing at Mern, Soldatsk, and Snyhurivka. Ukraine had retaken Ternovy Poti, but been repelled at Pravdine and Oleksandrivka. According to Pantelis Baburas, Greece's honorary consul in Kherson, the Ukrainians had relatively easily broken the Russian first line of defense near Kherson city, but had encountered much stiffer resistance at the Russian second line of defense in the area. By August 31, this second line was the main focus of combat, with Baburas stating that local sources had informed that both sides were suffering heavy losses. However, a Russian mill blogger reported that Ukrainians were making progress toward Vysokopolia further north, though the overall situation at the northern front line remained unclear. Mill bloggers also claimed that the Russians had been able to stabilize the front line at Oleksandrivka as well as Blaoditny, but had failed when attempting to retake Mern. Ukrainian advances were also reported at Ternovy Poti and Lyubomirivka. Later that day, Ukrainian sources claimed that 4 small villages had already been retaken, though Ukrainian soldiers also stated their opinion that this operation was not a large counteroffensive but rather a localized operation. Ukrainian presidential advisor Alexei Arestovych cautioned that the offensive was going to be a slow operation to grind the enemy, not a quick and massive campaign. September. From 1 to September 2, Russian mill bloggers reported further Ukrainian advances, but also a series of successful Russian counterattacks. Many villages were reportedly contested. On September 2, a day of mourning was declared by Ukrainian authorities in Zaporizhzhia, after the heavy losses suffered by the native 128th Mountain Assault Brigade during the opening days of the offensive. On September 3, the British Ministry of Defence said that Ukrainian forces had made 3 main lines of attack in Kherson Oblast, and had a military advantage of tactical surprise as a result of Russian commanders' mistakes and Russian logistical problems. Ukrainian forces destroyed Russian pontoon bridges. There was gunfire near the center of Kherson city. On the same day, Russian mill bloggers claimed that Ukrainian troops had captured Blaoditivka village and withdrawn from a few positions near Suky I Stavok. On September 4, President Zelensky announced the liberation of 2 villages in Kherson Oblast and 1 in Donetsk Oblast. Ukrainian authorities released a photo showing the raising of the Ukrainian flag in Vysokopolia by Ukrainian forces. On September 6, Ukraine started a second offensive in the Kharkiv area, where it achieved a rapid breakthrough. Meanwhile, Ukrainian attacks also continued along the southern front line, though reports about territorial changes were largely unverifiable. On September 12, President Zelensky said that Ukrainian forces have retaken a total of 6,000 square kilometers from Russia, in both the south and the east. The BBC stated that it could not verify these claims. On September 13, that Russian forces had withdrawn from Kyslivka, a settlement 15 kilometers from Kherson. On the same day, the Russia-backed deputy head of the Kherson region posted a video from the outskirts of the settlement in which he claimed that Ukrainian troops have not been able to enter it. The mayor of Melitopol reported that Russian forces were abandoning the city and were moving to Russian-held Crimea. Ukraine also claimed to have retaken Oleksandrivka on September 13. A local official claimed that Ukraine has retaken Kyslivka, but this has not been confirmed by the Ukrainian military or outside sources such as the ISW as of September 14. In order to slow down the Ukrainian advance, Russian forces blew up a dam at the Inhulets River, flooding parts of the front line. By September 24, U.S. officials assessed that the Russian situation at the Kherson front line was deteriorating, with the local troops suffering from poor morale and largely cut off from supply lines due to the loss of bridges across the Dnipro River. Russian military commanders had reportedly requested to retreat to more defensible positions, but President Putin had intervened and forbidden any retreat which would give up Kherson city.